Welcome to Sage Advice, an intergenerational program of the Silver Fox Club where we interview seasoned veterans who are industry experts. My guest today will be Al Goldberg, a seasoned expert, musician, and teacher. Thank you for being our guest today, Al.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Indeed a pleasure.
Please tell us a little bit about your background and how you became a musician and a music teacher.
Okay. I guess we could preface by saying a lot of hard work, many years, and motivation as a young man, role models, and having knowing exactly what I wanted to do as a youngster, which is a blessing. I didn't have to vacillate and say, except for once I also thought about being a doctor. But nevertheless, I knew exactly what I wanted, and fortunate that I had great direction on how to go about it.
So how did you start? What made you be interested in music, and who were your influences? Who were your mentors?
Okay. My mentors, I was very fortunate. I had long-haired teachers, a gentleman by the name of Harry Glantz, who was the prima trumpet player with Toscanini NBC Symphony. So I was fortunate enough to be taken on by him. And after a while, he suggested I see his nephew, a gentleman by the name of Philip Fisher, who had played with Stokowski with the Philadelphia, and then came back here and immersed himself in the shows, Radio City Music Hall, Raymond Page, recording. So although I was exposed to a classical background, which is very important, the structure and the chops, as we say, I was fortunate enough to have my second teacher a little more flexible as far as his musical tastes were concerned. Those for the mentors. As far as my motivation, my mother would always be singing in the house. At the age of probably 6, she took me to the Second Avenue Theater in Manhattan. That theater was primarily the Jewish musical. All of Second Avenue was that, with great artists like Molly Picon, her husband Joseph Ramshinsky, Aaron Lebedorf, Sholem Secunda. These were heavyweights. And sitting right up to the orchestra, I was just fascinated. I looked at the Bone Men playing the three-part harmony, which we don't hear harmonies today. We hear a lot of rhythmical motion, but as far as arrangement and harmony and other parts of structure of music, it's void. And what we're listening to, most of it today, is primarily rhythmical motion. With the advent, with a lot of guitar players starting in the 50s, the music field became a little more closed to what one we would play. But I knew exactly I wanted to be a trumpet player.
And how old were you when you knew that?
7 years old or 8.
Where did you grow up? Tell me a little bit.
Oh my God. Very fancy place, Brooklyn, New York.
Okay.
Overseas from here. And we lived in a 4th-floor walk-up. And at night I would listen to music. That I kept my 2 brothers awake because we all slept in the same bedroom, having so much money, being a child of the Depression. And I would listen to the first gentleman was coming from the Hotel Edison. To me, sounded like the world. Marvelous gig. A guy by the name of Alvy West, trumpet player. You know, that's kind of society music. And I would listen to him and say, boy, I would really love to do that. And I guess I realized in order to do that, I would have to put in a lot of time, hard work, and study. And I was fortunate enough to be somewhat precocious. As a dear friend of mine, Michael Riccozzi, wrote one time, he picks up instruments like I eat salted peanuts. I was a precocious kid. So I played a lot of axes, but I put 5 hours a day on my horn.
When did you first get your first horn?
Oh boy, my father really, my father was against it. My mother really motivated me. He had heard that musicians were engaging in horrible things like taking dope, and he had higher horizons for me, not having a chance to really get an education like his children did and his grandchildren. But my mother was, so she convinced him to take $40, which was a month's rent, and buy me my first horn. That's how it came to that. And
how old were you approximately?
a little before 9, 8.5 or 9.
Wow.
Yeah. We lived in Brooklyn, and I would have to walk about 9 blocks to the Sea Beach train, which is non-existent right now, and take it to Canal Street, which was about 28, perhaps 30-minute ride. Walk up the stairs, take what's called the Jamaica train to the end stop, get on a bus, which I don't recall the number, go to where St. John's is, Union Turnpike, take the Q17 bus, take it down to some 200-something street, and there I would see Phil. And so that was like 9 o'clock, and although the lesson was supposed to be 40 minutes, he saw I was hungry to learn, and so we would warm up together, we would do the lesson, bip-bap, and we'd do a lot of duets together, and talk a lot until his wife Beverly said, "Phil, you have to be down at the music hall." And I would get into his Packard. Going back, he would drop me off at St. John's. So just to take the lesson, it was a whole day on Saturday. I traveled.
And how much was the lessons back then?
Well, it was $3, but he took $2 from me, knowing that we had a lot of bread. $2 a lesson. Yeah.
Which was a lot of money back then.
Yes. I think the average salary guys were making $1 an hour, people working in factories or in that type of employ. I think school teachers that were doing $3,000 a year or $4,000.
So we're talking about like 1940?
You're right on the money. Yeah. That's correct.
When did you first start playing professionally? Because this is interesting. You started, before there were child labor laws, right?
That's correct. The first gig was $15 a week, upstate New York.
How old were you then?
Oh, golly, I think I was just about 13 or 12 and a half.
But you looked older.
Oh, yes, I always looked older, like now. I'm just a kid.
And you played trumpet in that?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, I was precocious. After a couple of years, I had good chops. Mm-hmm. And I played with older guys. Mm-hmm. And you learn while you're playing with them. The key to success is to immerse yourself with people who are not more talented, but who have more knowledge that you can glean from. Because as an actor going on the road with a show, I assume, for 6 months, you would learn a lot more than just going into the studio to pick up structure and factual kind of work. You learn that, and I was fortunate enough to be with older people who were fairly good players.
Was there a union back then?
Union, I call the union a guild.
Okay.
I call the Teamsters a union.
What was the name of what was the
Local 802.
Okay. That still exists, I believe. I think.
Yeah, fortunately, yes. At that time, there were 50 or 52,000 men and women in that book who had a union card. Unfortunately, only about 3,000 were really players. The rest were part-time, and there was so much work around. Even the players who really hadn't reached their peak, let's put it that way, were able to work. Every little restaurant had music. But playing a brass instrument or a violin, intonation is very, very important to play in tune and to hear before we play it. On the guitar, we can find a chord, whether it's major, minor, augmented, whatever, and it's there, whether we touch the instrument in 3 or 4 months. But an instrument like trumpet, trombone, French horn, strings, you have to hear it before you play it. They're very brave people, musicians. To sit for 10 minutes counting, like in Stravinsky Firebird, you have to count like 160 beats before coming in, not miss a beat, and pick it up and be right on the money. And Lord forbid if you break a note, that ends your career. You're mediocre. You don't have that luxury to erase it. So you really have to have good ears and good chops, which is an embouchure, and really, really play a lot.
What would you say? There's so many people these days that want to go into music and try to make a living out of it, but as you know, it's not that easy. So what would you say to those young people who want to go, whether it's music or the arts, because of the percentage that you just mentioned, what would your advice be?
It's a good question. Not just advice. I would share with them the difficulty and what challenges they would have and what most likely they would have to give up. their social life in order to practice every day. It's not just a part-time skill. We learn how to do it, and whoop-de-doo, here we go. And as far as going into it, become famous, in my opinion, being pragmatic, I think it's great to have your reputation with your peers, your working peers professionally, to know your qualifications. And once you're into that, you're really online to start moving. It's not, there are very few Charlie Parkers in the jazz field, who was, in the 20th century, in my opinion, the best. Everyone learned from him. As far as before that was Louis Armstrong. There are two heroes. All the rest to me are just imitating. In all due respect to great players, those were the giants. So you try to explain. The course is very, very rocky. Financially, there are ups and downs. So it's been very rewarding. The combination of both is very, very good to teach and to play.
What advice would you give to either a young musician coming up these days or to a young teacher?
Okay.
You could answer those separately, if you could.
Well, to be a teacher, you have to be motivated, and to be a performer, an artist, a painter, a sculptor, you have to be willing to give it all. It's not a part-time gig. And I would give them advice to the term to a musician who was working, we'd say you have to woodshed every day. That's your life. It becomes part of you. It becomes a major part of your life.
What does woodshed mean for those of us who
Well,
don't know?
that's to practice a lot. You do a lot of woodshedding at home, a lot of work. That's the key. And bring to their attention, it's a hard life, but when you love doing what you're doing, it's not that hard. Not like many marriages. It's very, very difficult, but when you're in love, you still find a way to keep it going. So it's the story of life. And I've been very happy with it. I have no regrets. And I would say, like I said to my daughter and to myself, follow your star and don't let anyone deter you, especially when they have the ability. There are going to be dry years, dry months. You stay with it.